Okay, we are back with one final video in our theme of edit and revise. You have done your self-editing. You have read this thing till you were blue in the face. You have maybe sought feedback from people like beta readers or professionals. Maybe you've run it through some editing software. And you have now gathered all of this feedback and edits, and you're probably like, okay, Danielle, I need to know what to do with this. Sometimes you jump into it and you can deal with it one at a time. But in the chance that you did seek feedback from a number of people and receive that feedback, possibly, let's just go with the example of you engaged maybe 5 beta readers and you're getting all of the feedback at you. Or maybe you did that, but you also hired a developmental editor or a line editor or whatever, right? So you have it coming from a couple different places. What do you do with that, right? So first, a word of caution. I've said this before, but I want to reiterate quickly. Your editing tools, software, and spell checker should not replace a human. So if that's the only thing you've done, do some more. Ask for feedback from a reader, a beta reader or friend or something. And always remember that you don't have to listen to the spell check. Or, for example, I've used Grammarly in the past. I've had clients use Grammarly and they'll come back and argue with me. Well, Grammarly says this, and then I have to sort of put aside my pride and hear them and make sure that I did not make a mistake, because it happens. I am human. But most of the time, what I've found is that Grammarly is a machine and not a human, and it is not reading the content the way it needs to be read. And it's sometimes picking up on a stylistic distinction in your writing that they're saying is incorrect, but you want to use it. For example, it might flag end of sentence preposition use. I'm going to tell you over and over that I don't think it's wrong. If you can fix it and throw it in the middle of the sentence, do it. But if it sounds clunky and antiquated and really, like, for which it's out of style, out of character for you, then leave it, right? But Grammarly is going to flag it and say wrong, 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 wrong. So you don't have to do what spell check or your editing tools tell you to do. They are machines. Always remember that you have the control over this. And that is the same advice I'm going to give you when I talk to you about how to implement feedback that you receive from beta readers and even professionals. I personally have clients tell me that sometimes they take my suggestions and, probably a lot of times they take my suggestions, but sometimes they don't. And it's because I'm jumping in and I'm kind of trying to illustrate my point with an example. I'll say, hey, this sentence is reading a little clunky. Why don't you consider rewording it? Here's an example of how you can do that. And they might say like, oh, I love that. Or they might say like, let me try it my way. And that's perfectly fine. This is your story. At the end of the day, this is your story and you can write it however you damn well please. That's my message of empowerment to you. This is your story. Say what you want. But consider feedback a gift and allow that gift to give you what you need to make your story better, but use your own filter, okay? So this is what I want you to do. For this video, we're going to assume that you've received feedback from a couple different sources and you're trying to sift through what you pay attention to. Even if you received feedback from one source, you still should use this filter and just ask yourself a couple things. Number one, does this feel in line with my book? Now, you might be asking me like, well, how does a comma or a misspelling feel out of alignment? It doesn't, right? You want the right answers. So if there is more of a black and white area where, Danielle's going to tell you, actually, you should use an M dash instead. Or a spell check caught a misspelling. Great, fix it. Accept that feedback, accept that edit, and move on. But there's, like I said, there might be a wording thing where all of a sudden it's like, oh, Um, this is feeling a little clunky to me, the reader. Why don't you change it around? But you're like, no, I want it that way for a particular reason. So if you are feeling there is a reason to keep it the way it is, even if the feedback is having you look at possibly changing it, that's okay. You can do what you want, but under look under the surface. Why is the feedback coming at you like that? What about it triggered me as a reader to give you that feedback? Was it just language I'm not familiar with? Was it a concept I'm not familiar with? Was I confused in some way that you should be concerned about? And so the feedback feels really weird. Like if I'm like, hey, what about that time you took the trip to the river, but you haven't even talked about that until 3 chapters later? Why all of a sudden is my feedback popping in there, right? You have to ask yourself these kind of critical thinking questions when looking at the feedback. But also consider the source of your feedback. If you have a beta reader who's a strong, very strongly centered in your ideal readership, and they're telling you that something isn't sitting right, or they didn't enjoy something about your story because they found it narrow-minded or something in that particular area that they are very familiar with, then maybe you take that under consideration and you make some adjustments. If, on the other hand, it's sort of a friend and you're not quite sure how it even happened that they got the book, or, maybe they're not a professional, they're not qualified, they've never written anything, they're not in your readership, you give that a little less of a weight. So you may start by lining up your feedback and saying, okay, who is the most qualified? Who is the most who is going to give me the most valuable feedback based upon their background and all of that criteria we talked about? Give them a 5 stars, right? Then you look at the next level. Who is probably in the middle range? Someone who maybe hasn't written but is in my readership. Give them maybe 3. And then down at the bottom with number 1 is someone who's sort of that throwaway, like they don't get your story, they're not in your readership, they're not qualified or trained. Maybe they get 1 star. So you start with your most valuable feedback person, right? The source. And you start by implementing or reviewing their feedback and implementing it into your manuscript. If, going one by one like that based on the number of stars you've rated them. That's one method you can do. You can kind of implement here. Another method is to create a separate document altogether, and maybe and I like to go chapter by chapter, or maybe you want to do section by section, but inserting, copy and pasting the feedback from your various sources into one document and seeing if there's any overlap, seeing if there's any themes that emerge. Why did you get feedback on that one particular sentence or paragraph or character or whatever from 2 or 3 people? That's a red flag, right? Or maybe not a red flag, but something you should pay attention to. Why did this person say they like it, but this person say it just confused them? See where the contradictions lie, and try to again kind of rate which would be heavier weighted on value, which is more valuable to you based on that criteria, especially in a contradictory situation where you're getting 2 pieces of contradictory feedback. Who do you choose to listen to? And I personally take great pleasure in crossing things out or deleting them off the page once they're implemented, or once you've decided I don't want to listen to that one, I'm going to listen to this one, or I don't like that piece of feedback because it doesn't really do, I didn't want to go in that direction and they're trying to take me in that direction. Excuse me. Maybe they identified a gap where you were holding back, but it's something that you feel very vulnerable about and chose not to share yet. They could be identifying that gap and feeling like there's something missing, and then you can even make some adjustments there. How did they identify that gap? Do you need to tighten something up? But you don't have to add the thing they're identifying is missing, right? So just make this a very judgy type of process. Get real judgy on this. Who are these people? Why should you listen to them? Why should their feedback matter? How should you implement it? You don't need to listen to everything they say, right? And even as a professional, you don't need to listen to everything that person says. But do keep in mind that the professional is going to keep your publishing kind of end goal in mind. For me, my goal is always to help my writers write their very best book and get that published. If you're just saying like, I don't care if I'm going to get this published, I just sort of want to do a good job, I'm still going to push you, but we're not going to maybe be pushing you harder and harder and harder to get something that's market viable, right? Something that will sell in the market. That's not your end goal. Your end goal is to just publish something for your family, and they're going to want all of that extra detail that the market's not going to want, etc. So understanding your end goal is something that professionals are trained to do to give you the best services. Beta readers might not have that mindset, so they may not give you feedback with that mindset. So take that into consideration as well. So once you're kind of done filtering through and maybe eliminating some feedback that you don't want to implement, you can even take this a step further and make a copy of your current manuscript and implement the feedback in the copy and go through and then give it another fresh read and see how that feedback feels to you, and just allow yourself to really play and manipulate these sections and paragraphs and words and just dig into it. Get your hands dirty in the clay, because you already have your version 1 saved, right? You don't have to worry about that. You can just leave it and create version 2 and see how that feels. I've had a couple clients that I've recommended, when they're working on 2 different documents, they actually like color the background of the document something really pretty, or like, maybe a pastel pink or something that you're really drawn to, and you can use that to enhance the mood a little bit and identify like, this is my new fancy fresh version. And so they're copying from their old version to their new, and then they're making the updates, and they're copying from the old to the new and making their updates. And sometimes they leave stuff in the old and they don't copy it to the new because that's the feedback they've received, or that's where they're going. So this can be a very personalized, creative process. And you can even come up with systems where, maybe you implement some of the feedback that you received. Maybe it's like, this is beta reader 1 and this is the 5-star beta reader. You implement that and see how that feels, and then you judge how, where you're at in the manuscript against the other feedback. Did it resolve some of that? So you can really have fun with this and play with it. But ultimately, I want you to keep 2 things in mind, okay? This is kind of the entire point of this video, because I know you can jump in and figure this out. But number 1, this is your book, this is your story, you can do whatever the heck you want, and I want you to really take control of that and just own it, and own the fact that you can accept or reject this feedback with an open heart and with an open mind. And number 2, don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed. If you did receive just buckets and buckets of feedback and you're like, where do I even start? Just start somewhere, pick one. You don't have to do this rating system and all of that, okay? Just ignore the 9 and pick one. If you got 10, just ignore that you got 9. You don't have to read them all and then implement them all. So don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed, because you diminish the value of receiving feedback when you do that. You want to make sure that this feedback carries the ultimate value to you, your book, and ultimately to your readers, okay? So this is where it gets a little complex, because you get all of these differing views, and you might at the end of the day saying, okay, I'm done, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not looking at any more of these. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. Or you take the whole lot of them, you review, and you highlight your top 10 pieces of feedback and you implement them. That's okay too. If you have any major flaws in your manuscript, you're going to see that in the feedback, and you can pick that up as this is high importance. You can also kind of rate the feedback based on importance. For example, structure, theme, narrative drive, missing information. Those are pretty important. But if you're like, getting little things like, well, I really wish that this character was, in chapter 3 too. Little kind of like whims. You don't have to listen to those, right? You can rate those very low or ignore them or delete them or whatever you want. So to summarize, it's your book, do what you want, and don't let yourself get overwhelmed, or it's this whole process of getting feedback is just sort of null and void, and you might as well throw them in the trash. But feedback can be such a really great thing, and I don't want you to be scared of getting it from the right people and using it to your advantage. Now, a quick subtopic on this video. If you are getting heavy line edits or proofreads on the page and you're not getting like big kind of developmental feedback edits from your beta readers, I assume people are working with beta readers in more of a developmental mindset and not an editing capacity, which is really what you should be doing. Beta readers shouldn't be used as editors either, unless they're trained as editors, and then you're just hiring an editor. But if you get feedback, line editing feedback, or edits, I should say, you can also go through and judge each single edit that you've made. And if you're not sure if they're correct, assume they're correct. This person, if you're hiring a professional, should know what they're doing. But if they don't fit right, you can reject them. And in Microsoft Word, you can do this: accept and reject, or you can accept all. So play with those settings in your Microsoft Word document if you're using that, which I assume you probably are. But you can play with those settings, and it'll allow you to have more control rather than physically having to like type those updates onto a different document, right? So make sure that you're kind of getting in there and using the software as it's meant to be used with all of the tools. And if you don't know how to use them, reach out and I can do a quick tutorial for you as well. Because Track Changes is amazing if you're not using it already. You can do that for your own revisions too. So that's today's video. I hope it was helpful. It was a little willy-nilly because there's no right or wrong way on how to accept feedback, but do approach it with kind of a plan in mind, a bit of a process or a system that you want to use with those two goals: to do what you want at the end of the day and feel okay about that, and then make sure that you don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed, and just keep this as a very strict process, part of your process, part of your project management, and just looking at the end goal of writing the best book you possibly can write. And everyone else's opinions on that aren't as heavy as yours is. If you're happy with your book, that's all that matters, because you are the one that is putting yourself out there. Obviously, we want the readers to like it, but that is sort of comes with the territory. If you like it, they're probably going to like it too. So that is that. We are going to move on in our theme, and stay tuned for updates on that. And of course, let me know if you have questions about feedback, or if you would like a little tutorial on track changes. I'd be happy to do that too. We'll see you soon.